Okay, the study guide section on file types and printing. Probably not the most fun or interesting topic, but very necessary. It'll separate the amateurs from the professionals if you know this stuff. What is a PSD, a .psd file? You'll see that all the time if you're working in Photoshop. It's a Photoshop file. So when you're in Photoshop and you're working, you just hit save, it automatically saves it as a Photoshop file, which means that it preserves the layers, and therefore it is a very large file size. Well, it can be. If you're only working on one layer, then maybe not so much, but most of us use at least 2 or 3 layers on any photo we're working on. So it could be over a megabyte pretty easily. Could be 30, 40 megabytes. What are the attributes of a TIFF file? I've written them up there. Well, I wrote one of them. It is lossless and large. Okay, so we are talking about the sizes of files and their attributes. A TIFF file is a really good, in fact, all these are really good to know because you probably want to save your photos in each one of these file types. A TIFF file preserves all of the attributes, all the pixels, everything about the photo, the colors. It preserves it all. It doesn't lose anything, therefore they call it lossless. It does not lose, it is lossless. If it is without price, it is priceless. It is without loss, so it is lossless. It's kind of a funny word, isn't it? And it's large because it doesn't compress anything. It doesn't try to crunch numbers so that you got a smaller file size, which you do want for some reasons we'll talk about. It just preserves it all. And so very commonly you're over 5 megabytes on a lossless TIFF file. But you want to save your stuff, you want to save your work, your best work, and preserve it, and so you want to know about a TIFF file. I save everything that I really like as a TIFF file. And it's still relatively small compared to like video or other things that you can really use a lot of data on and take up your hard drives and servers, etc. Number 3, describe the JPEG file format. Okay, here's another one. This is lossy. So if it's the opposite of lossless, it actually loses some of your data. What it really does is it compresses it. And it is adjustable. It's a very valuable file type. It's everywhere. You'd say it's ubiquitous because pretty much everyone uses it, it's everywhere, and when you use it you can actually decide how much you want it to compress the data. So what it tries to do, and it does a very good job of this, it tries to say, let's just say there's 20 million pixels, okay, and it tries to say we're going to still convey that photo, but we're going to use 10,000 pixels. That's not really an accurate way of saying it, but that helps you understand what it does. It's better to say the actual size. So right now it is a 10 megabyte file size. That's pretty big. You can still email that. You can email anything up to 25 meg. But it's a pretty big file type, and we'll talk why that could be a problem in a second. So it says I'm going to take it from 25 meg and I can adjust it down to 10 meg or even like 100K, which isn't even a meg, right? Now, by the time you've compressed it down to 100K, it'll look pretty crappy. But it is cool that you can do that with JPEG. All right, what is the most common file format for photos? Oh, it's the same answer, JPEG. So that's an easy one. That's a give you. Gimme, give you. But it is the most common. Everybody uses JPEG. I think almost any software application will open up a JPEG. The type of file that the camera captures before compressing it to any consumer file standard. So before the camera or any other software can do anything to your photo, what is it? It's just like before you make toast. That bread is raw. That's the file type. It's raw. And professional photographers are always shooting in RAW. They keep all their data. And of course, it's a huge file size. It's almost like it's before it's a file. We don't even bother editing in RAW file type. I didn't say we don't edit in the RAW. I said we don't edit the RAW file type. But you absolutely should know about it, and you should use it, and especially if you have your own cameras. Most cameras, especially like your phones and everything like that, they pretty much automatically compress, and it usually is a JPEG file type. There are other types. And then what is PPI? That is pixels per inch. Someone said Pixar. It does look like Pixar, doesn't it? Pixels per inch. So again, we talked about your cameras being megapixel cameras on your phones. I'll just pretend this is a camera. She says I don't want to go get one. But when you shoot, your camera can shoot, 7 to 10 megapixels. That's 10 million pixels. And the more pixels you have per inch, the better it looks. We already talked about that, right? But now we're saying you've shot that, but what are you going to output it as? What do you want to save that as? When we're talking about megapixels, your cameras on your phones will probably shoot 7 to 10 megapixels depending on the size of the image sensor. So again, we talked about that image sensor that converts light to data, and how many pixels it can do depends on the size of the image sensor. So your phone doesn't have enough room to have a really large image sensor. They usually measure them in millimeters. But bigger cameras will have bigger image sensors and therefore have more megapixels. Now what this works out to is how many megapixels it takes to, say, capture 300 pixels per inch in like a 5x7 print. And then you need more megapixels for 300 pixels per inch for an 8x10 print. And then by the time you get to like a large picture frame, a 24-inch picture frame, you'd have to have about a 24 megapixel camera. Now there is a way to cheat on these megapixels. If you have a 12 megapixel camera, for example, you can take 4 photos and then stitch them together in Photoshop, and you essentially are using a 50 megapixel camera. And then of course you can have a large picture frame photo. But what happens if you shoot with a 6 megapixel camera and you blow it up to a picture frame or even a billboard, it'll look very pixelated. So we'll say now, number 7, what is the standard minimum resolution of pixels per inch for printed photos? It's actually only 300. It's been a standard for a long time. 300. So if I'm printing something, it needs to be 300 pixels per inch. What is the standard PPI for electronics and web graphics? Well, it's only 72. And you're saying, what? So when I'm looking on my screens, very typically because it's the internet, I only have 72 pixels per inch. Let's say that is 72 pixels per inch. Have you guys ever done that, where you've blown something up that was kind of a small standard resolution size and you blew it up and it looked like that? That is pixelization. That's number 9. Well, the reason it's 72 is because if you had a whole lot of pixels per inch on the web, it would take forever to load a web page. Have you ever been to a web page where there's a really nice graphic, a really nice photo or something like that, but it actually takes a while to load? Some might take 20 seconds to load. The professional photography pages take 20 seconds to load because they're trying to keep all their data, all their pixels. But the resolution, the standard for electronics and web graphics is 72. It's less data and it loads faster, and that's why. And it still looks pretty good, but if you got a really big screen, a big screen TV, it wouldn't look as good. So again, number 9, the effect of enlarging a digital image to the point that the square pixels are noticeable. This really isn't an accurate representation, but that's the idea. The idea would be that whatever the resolution is that we shot it in, if you just keep enlarging it, eventually you will see that they are actually square pixels, right? So they call that pixelization. Okay, another problem you can have, like pixelization, number 10, the term for digital distortion in an image. This is usually extra unwanted chunks of pixels. It's called artifacts. Artifacts are just simply when something screws up with the digital data. It can happen in the camera. It can happen when the camera is transferring through the buffer to the card. So it can actually be captured wrong in the camera. It can happen in capturing to the computer. Sometimes it happens even in the application like Photoshop. Usually it's that way though in the camera. And so what we're seeing here is this little mess of data, pixels, is not intentional. That's not what the balloon looked like. Those are digital artifacts. Yeah, and you can see some others. Someone circled these on whatever demonstration this was, but these and these and these. Of course, you also see pixelization because they've blown up so much. Where I first saw this was over at SFCN when I was running the TV channel, and you'll see it like on ESPN. When in motion video, you get these chunks of pixels, and sometimes the stream is just not fast enough to catch up. Like especially if you're watching sports. Once in a while, we'll say a guy is running down the field in soccer, and his head kind of like gets behind his feet for a second as the digital data kind of shifts around, and then all the squares line up again. That's artifacts. Number 11, to get a black and white photograph, it is necessary to shoot in black and white. True or false? As you know, that is false. There are purists, and I absolutely respect them. They're smarter than me. They shoot on black and white film, and they get exactly the look they want. Hallelujah. But for the average guy, I shoot in color. I recommend you guys shoot in color, because if you ever want it in color, you got it in color. And in Photoshop, you can take it out and play with it to your heart's desire. So that's what I recommend. The process of doing your work step by step. For example, capture, edit, output. That is called workflow. A lot of people talk about workflow as if it's the most important thing in their lives. So you got some serious magazine professionals and photographers, and in video we talk about all the time. So what's your workflow going to be? Well, this is what I do. I line up the shoot and I make sure that it's at the golden hour, and then I take out these two cameras with these two lenses, and then I shoot raw, and I make sure that I've got my fast memory cards, and then I get it, I actually export it to a field hard drive, so I've got backup there, and then from the field hard drive I ingest it into the computer, and the first thing we do is we go through all the shots, and then we edit the shots, and then we send it off to the magazine editor, and they say re-edit it, and then we finally output it in both JPEG, TIFF, even RAW file formats, and then the magazine editors take this, and then they finally output it in the magazine. That's the workflow, the step-by-step thing. And like I say, some people really analyze their workflow. All I care about is that you know that you capture, you edit, that's why I emphasized it with the little cursor there, and then you output. 13, a sheet of thumbnail photos used for proofing. You already know what that is because you already did it. That is a contact sheet. It's also called a proof sheet. Most of the time in modeling, they'll take 100 photos of a model, and they're modeling the new hat that looks like a recipe index card file. And you take all kinds of poses, and then you choose about 20 that you like, and you send them off to Vogue magazine or GQ magazine, and you send them off on one sheet. But anyway, proof sheet or contact sheet. I usually call them contact sheet in our purposes here because we're doing a lot of different kinds of photos, not just choosing like which photo best represents that new hat product. The last stage of workflow is when you save to a file type and export. I just said what that was. Once you've saved your file type and you export it and it goes out to the world, it is the output. Okay, that's it on that section. I hope you know your file types, and when you go to print or output, you know what file type to save it as.